Did you know that the scientist who stopped the tuberculosis pandemic and saved countless lives was trans?
You're so woke, Abby. I can be woker. Did you know that Alan L. Hart not only was the first to use x-rays to catch early TB, thus saving patients through early detection, but that he also received the first U.S. gender reassignment surgery in the year 1917?
1917?
1917!
What year is it now and this is still a problem?
It didn't just end there. The second reason people were dying was because of the stigma around getting diagnosed with TB. But guess who had a unique understanding of social stigma to counteract it and make people feel safe to get TB tested?
Alan?
Alan! And that's the name of my car.
He referred to himself as the chest doctor and thus got folks to feel safe enough to receive medical care in time to save their lives and prevent the spread. He was a literal bringer of happy endings.
No happy endings for Alan, though. Despite creating the gold standard for TB detection today, he wasn't allowed to marry, was outcasted for being trans, and left to die a lonely death to maintain societal norm.
Bad Bethany. No queer death today.
I have never been so happy to be a liar, liar, sweater on fire.
Because Alan married his sweetheart of 37 years, was fiercely protected by his family, and lived a happy ending saving countless lives.
Woohoo!
Alan's story and more up next. Welcome to Small Anthropoids. The year is 1868. It is a dark stroke on the canvas of history. We now know that the mysterious illness wiping out whole families and towns is, drumroll, contagious. Beyond that, we know nothing. Tuberculosis, or TB, is the leading cause of death, only a century before COVID. Known as the White Plague, TB kills more people annually at this time than homicide, war, malaria, and typhoid combined. Characterized by coughing up white phlegm and a general wasting away of the patient, a TB diagnosis equals death. Don't worry though. Fast forward 14 marvelous years to 1882. German microbiologist Robert Koch has just discovered something remarkable, something that could stop the pandemic. Tuberculosis is caused by a single bacterium. Not so scary, huh? Well, the problem was a single sneeze from someone infected contained hundreds of bacteria. So what do we now know after 14 years of hard work and millions of deaths? Tuberculosis isn't just contagious. It's uber contagious. So now, guess what, folks? A TB diagnosis doesn't just equal death. It is now a sentence to live and die alone. Isn't that fun? Fabulous. On the plus side, the isolation of TB sufferers stopped the spread. But on the much larger negative side, TB sufferers were miserable. They became an untouchable, a total outcast. They lost their jobs, landlords refused to house them, even hotels turned them away for guest safety. Totally rejected by society, victims gathered in secluded tuberculosis hospitals to die. Now, you might be thinking, this is a bit bleak, Abby. Can we get to the happier part about the super amazing trans doctor nobody knows about who was crucial in ending this pandemic? Yeah, we're getting there. But first, it's vital to note this very important concept. The year is 1890. TB patients are cast out from their homes, families, jobs, lives, society, simply for having something out of their control. You're going to die anyway. If you started coughing up phlegm, would you tell anyone about it? I wouldn't. And I know it's easy to say you would for the sake of others, for altruism, for your family's safety. But look at what happened during COVID. Look at how many or how few people wore masks to protect others from dying. Heck, during this moment in time, if you're a little kid who starts coughing phlegm and you see your friends forced to leave school forever for the same reason, you're not telling anyone you have a sore throat. That's exactly what happened. The isolationist stop the spread policy worked for a minute or two, but in the end, it hurt more than it helped. Patients with TB didn't come forward to receive help, as there wasn't much help to give other than tearing them away from their loved ones and their income. Therefore, undiagnosed TB patients suffered silently and died silently, or until their obvious TB signs showed and they were locked away after any window of medical intervention had long closed. The year is 1890, TB patients are cast out from their homes, families, jobs, lives, society, simply for something out of their control. I wonder if someone else would understand this social stigma. Oh, that's right. A transgender doctor, perhaps. Side note, I was going to say a trans doctor in the 1920s, but let's face it, a trans doctor in the 2020s faces the same stigma, so I guess the year doesn't matter. Enter Alan L. Hart. Alan was born in 1890 to a loving family. Although assigned female sex at birth, he dressed, lived, and played as a little boy, and his family supported him. He wrote that this was one of his happiest times of his life, because he was able to present as male and play with boys' toys made for him by his grandfather. Although this disgruntled his mother, for the most part, Alan's early upbringing was happy and healthy. In fact, in his grandparents' obituaries in 1921 and 1924, they even listed Alan as their beloved grandson. Again, 1924, people. This was 1924, exactly 100 years ago this year. Words cannot express how incredible Alan's story is. Trouble, however, started stirring when Alan was forced to dress as a girl in school. He didn't quite fit in, but bumped up more against his teachers than the other kids. With his classmates, he played with the other boys and even flirted with girls. But when his teachers asked him to write about female classmates, they were horrified to find that he had portrayed them as prize fighters or boyish basketball players. Scandalous, right? This tendency continued into his literary career in adulthood. One critic even wrote that Alan, quote, "despite being a doctor, knows surprisingly little about women," end quote. Probably because Alan wasn't one. Alan's favorite game, however, growing up was playing doctor. One time, when he was chopping wood on the family farm, he accidentally cut off the whole tip of his finger. No problem for Alan, though. He simply dressed it himself and went about his day. Although Alan was forced to go through medical school presenting as a woman, one professor was sympathetic and allowed him to write under a male pseudonym, as well as issued him a medical degree with his male pseudonym in parentheses. Alan was still deeply unhappy with his medical certificate, though, and rightfully so. Because his female birth name was listed first on his medical degree, he could only apply to jobs presenting as a woman, or risk being outed as trans. Luckily, Alan's research and easily accessible writing style eventually set him apart from other candidates. He was one of the first doctors to realize that the myriad illnesses, including consumption, phthisis, phthisis pulmonalis, Koch's disease, scrofula, lupus vulgaris, white plague, King's evil, Pott's disease, and gibbous, were actually all the same illness: tuberculosis. Now that he's just fighting one disease, he can set about on documenting it. Hart became the first to document how TB spread via the circulatory system, which caused lesions on the kidneys, spine, and brain, eventually resulting in death. Although no cure yet existed, Alan realized that the best shot for survival was early detection. Now that he knew where the illness first showed up internally, he could detect it before external symptoms showed, thus massively reducing the spread and brightening the prognosis. However, he just needed some magical way to look inside a person's living, breathing body without dissecting or mutilating their form. Oh right, X-rays. Although the answer seems obvious to us today, back then, X-rays were elementary, my dear Watson, not widespread, and had only been invented 5 years after Alan's birth. Because of that, their limited use thus far had only been to diagnose broken bones. Alan, however, was the first to realize that X-rays had a plethora of other uses outside bones. X-rays could detect TB before it became contagious. Holy lordy buckets! This is it! This is the life-saving discovery that can once and for all stop the pandemic killing millions of people every year. Sure, it isn't a cure, but with not just spread prevention, but a viable chance to beat the notorious illness and live, who wouldn't want to get screened for TB? Like everyone. Although Alan's discoveries were now finally enough for employers to overlook his feminine name on his medical degree to get him hired, his wide open and free tuberculosis clinics were, well, Yikes. Alan had already done the hard part. He'd overcome societal adversity by being a trans man in the medical field and succeeding. He compiled 10 faux diseases into one. He then documented that diseases spread internally so that he could recognize the early illness before it became contagious and deadly. Above all, he trailblazed a method to find those internal signs and diagnose people before the first sneeze even happened. Why the heckins were people not coming to his clinics? Well, remember that social stigma around getting diagnosed with transmittable death that ripped families apart, fired workers, made thousands homeless, and sent millions into hiding? Yeah, ain't nobody wants to get diagnosed with TB, not even if it would save their life. Hence, Alan's health clinics remained empty. Hart wrestled with this dilemma. How could I counteract decades of social stigma around a disease that has killed so many? Alan asked himself. How could anyone understand such a degree of being outcasted that people would rather die than be labeled as transgender, having TB? Alan had an idea. He struck out the sign that said tuberculosis in red ink and instead wrote chest clinic. He integrated himself into the towns he transferred to, both he and his wife volunteering and becoming well-liked in the community, where he then introduced himself as the chest doctor and personally invited people to get screened. He also referred to his patients as simply chest patients, who then could introduce themselves as chest patients to other sufferers in secret, and all could get diagnosed and the help they needed. Alan didn't just solve the scientific problem of combating the sickness. He solved arguably the much larger, more important social problem, getting people to these clinics. Put simply, Alan understood how the change of a single word could have the power to save or destroy someone's life. Although most of Alan's writings were destroyed per his request at his death, we'll finish out this episode with a pair of Alan L. Hart's famous quotes, where he said, "Each of us must take into account the raw material which heredity dealt us at birth, and the opportunities we have had along the way, and then work out for ourselves a sensible evaluation of our personalities and accomplishments. And I am happier since I have made this transition than I have been in my life, and I will continue this way as long as I live. I am ashamed of nothing." Alan L. Hart married his sweetheart in 1925 and lived happily with Edna until his death in 1962. He requested his ashes be spread over the Puget Sound, where he and Edna spent many happy summers together. Edna also acted on his second wish, and at her passing, donated their entire estate to leukemia research, from which Alan's mother died. By the end of Alan's life, several TB cures have been found, and today the US has one of the lowest TB rates in the world. It's easy to feel sometimes that we tiny humans are invincible. We're clever. We can think our way out of everything. However, it is humbling to remember that we are in constant danger of being wiped off the planet by a single, unknown bacterium. What will be the next tuberculosis or COVID-19? Who knows? On that note, it's important to bring up another humbling statistic. The mortality rates in transgender people are up to 75% higher than cisgender. According to CNN, people who identify as trans are 7.7 times more likely than their cis counterparts to die by suicide. In some conservative countries, the suicide rates of trans people is as high as 50%. I repeat, 50% of the trans population in these countries are dying by their own hand. During this Pride Month, I urge you to take action. Obviously, don't be weird about it, but take the extra time to reach out to trans folks and to people in the LGBT+ community in general, just to check in. Be a friendly face. You never know what someone is going through under the surface, so it never hurts to be kind. To everyone, but especially to minority groups. Silence is not friendliness. From personal experience, I can attest that silence is often an opportunity to project our deepest fears into its meaning. Like, this person hates me, or this person looking at my pride socks will probably cause me bodily harm. So break the silence. Strike up the small talk. Just be a friendly face. I repeat, you never know what someone is going through on the inside. Who knows? The person you just made feel accepted might be the future Alan L. Hart, here to save us small anthropoids from ending up as mysterious fossils in Earth's next evolved species museums. My bets are on octopus. They're more clever than some people I know. Like my sister Bethany. Shh. Hey! Kidding! I'm just kidding, Bethany. That's our show. I'm Abby.
I'm Bethany.
Stay curious, stay proud. We hope any feelings of small were not scary.
Take care, small anthropoids.